Hey, everybody. Happy Thursday. Welcome back to the Podcast Daily, a very special episode, one of the most special that we've ever done. We have a friend of the podcast joining us, a longtime friend, one of the greatest friends any of us have ever had, John Brice from Football Scoop. Also lives in South Bend, so we're looking to him today for some Notre Dame insight and access. He will be in Columbus over the weekend. I hope he's found somewhere to stay.
I hope so too. Chateau de Ward maybe is booked. I'm not sure. So my wife's in charge of arrangements, but we all know what that's like to play second fiddle.
Yeah, well, you do have to compete because normally that guest room is occupied by the co-host of this episode, Jeremy Birmingham over there. So
yeah, I'm surrendering it though. This week John can have it. This weekend I'm gonna depart Columbus and head back home at whatever time that we get out of that stadium on Saturday night. But I just want you to know that I expect you to make sure you turn everything over.
Your magnanimous selflessness is not lost on me, Berm. You're a gentleman and a scholar.
That's true.
All right, that's the two JBs over there. I am Austin Ward, and we are now just 2 days away from kickoff in the Horseshoe, a top 5 showdown that John doesn't feel quite like one to me, with a 17.5-point spread. What has been the mood in South Bend as these Irish get ready to try and go shock the world?
Yeah, I think the mood is probably just relatively businesslike. It's a one of resolve. I don't get the sense from being on campus earlier this week that there's a lot of intimidation out of the Notre Dame camp. Look, they know they have to play extremely well. They know that there's a tremendous challenge on deck, but there's a lot of belief from this program that both emanates from the top down and from the down up. And I think that's probably the best thing that Marcus Freeman has done for this Notre Dame program, having been in South Bend now for about 5 years and been closely around the Notre Dame program for 3 to 4 years now. There is a different mindset. There is a different approach, and there's certainly, without question, much more unity in this program. What that means on Saturday night, we all will see sometime after 7:30. But there is more collective buy-in, I believe, in this Notre Dame program. Again, and that starts directly because of Marcus Freeman.
I think that starts with the players who last year basically pulled off a coup to make sure Marcus Freeman was the coach. And I think that there's no reason for Notre Dame, as you look at it, to be intimidated by Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State is not Alabama as far as just the physical. They get off the bus and you're like, holy crap, these guys just look different. Ohio State, obviously, the real challenge for Notre Dame is stopping the skill of Ohio State. And how do you do that to keep the game close in that first half before, at that point it could sort of slip away if you let the offense of Ohio State start to get going a little bit. But I mean, I don't think Notre Dame from a physical standpoint should be intimidated by Ohio State. They are one of the top 6 or 7 teams in the country. I think that, to Austin's point about it not feeling like a top 5 matchup, all that does to me is really underscore the disparity between the top 3 or 4 teams in the country, just talent-wise, top to bottom, 1 to 85, and the rest of the country. Because Notre Dame is undoubtedly a top 10 team in the country with talent alone. But if you really separate them out between Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, that gap is a lot larger than it probably would be perceived to be by people just looking at rankings.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Berm, and probably potentially a future the podcast episode, because we can talk about how that could play into the college football playoff expansion down the road. But there is, I would say, a huge disparity between, to me this year, I think it's between the top 3 versus maybe the next wave of 9 teams. I think 1 through 3 are clearly in one class, 4 through 12 in another class. To your point about not being physically intimidated, and you guys have covered some of the great Ohio State programs of the last decade plus, and then Austin and I were in the SEC together, and I made the comment just
not covering some of the great Tennessee teams.
No, but we saw some great teams. We saw some great teams. That's my point. And we had great shower discipline, thanks to Derek Dooley.
That's right.
But
that's right.
I made the comment to one of the Notre Dame coaches a few weeks ago that for the first time that I've been around their program on a really close basis now for 4 years, 4 seasons, they looked on their first and second string offensive line and about 10 deep on the defensive line to have an Ohio State type, to have an SEC type of depth and units on those sides of the line of scrimmage. They look like a Georgia and LSU, some of the better Florida teams, obviously Alabama. They have much better depth and physical stature in that depth than I've seen Notre Dame have, from 18-19 on.
Those, I believe it was on the defensive line on Tuesday night where some salty language was used, John. I just not used to hearing that from those fine boys in South Bend. They seem pretty confident, at least on that unit, on the defensive side of the ball. And that's a really intriguing matchup because in Columbus, Ohio State fans have wondered, well, can this group be as nasty and as physical on the offensive line as Ohio State needs to be? We saw in the rivalry game against Michigan, they weren't able to run the ball in those short yardage situations where they needed to win. You have Paris Johnson moving to left tackle. You have DeJuan Jones, who had some issues with the speed rush last year. You've got new guys at guard, and then Luke Whippler there in the middle with the year of starting experience. But I mean, that's a talented offensive line. But if you're looking across the matchups here, that's maybe the one that Notre Dame probably could feel the best about.
Well, and I think a wild card element of that very matchup, Austin, is Al Golden. And I think part of Notre Dame's confidence, quite frankly, derives from Al Golden and what he's brought with him, both as a head coach at the collegiate level and then a several-year assistant coach, both with the Detroit Lions, not so impressive, and then as a member of last year's Cincinnati Bengals squad that obviously finishes Super Bowl runner-up. And so I think that a lot of the confidence that Notre Dame is displaying on defense obviously starts with the Ademilola twins that you referenced, and then also the return of Isaiah Foskey. Riley Mills is a guy who I expect to kind of stamp his arrival very early this season. One of those freakishly athletic, super hardworking guys, maybe the strongest player on the team, firmly entrenched as a significant part of the D-line rotation. And then again, schematically, I think because of Al Golden, they feel like they're going to be able to bring some things that can be potential disruptors and difference makers Saturday night.
Is there always so much profanity at your media availability over there? That's weird. We don't have that.
No, I thought I was at your house for a minute, but that was unexpected behavior. You guys know I spent a couple of years teaching school as I needed a little hiatus from the media world and from what Rocky Top had become by the time I left Knoxville. And unexpected behavior was a term I got very familiar with to talk to my students. And that was unexpected behavior Tuesday night at South Bend on the Notre Dame campus.
John, obviously being around the Ohio State fan base, we've seen a number of, people over the last decade that are crazy, right? So that's just the way it works. But being around Notre Dame, do you see like the fan base when they hear something like that on Tuesday night? I mean, I'm not going to put the quote up, but we can paraphrase one of the how do you say the last name? Ademilola twins said that they were the baddest MFers on the planet or something.
Mama Gemmas, I believe. Mama Gemmas.
Oh, yeah. my bad. I thought it was MFers. But when that happens, the Notre Dame fan base is, sort of regal at times and hoity-toity, I guess is the word I would use. Was there an outcry in South Bend? Like, how dare this happen on our esteemed campus?
My wife Jessica and I ate dinner last night out on our patio. That's only pertinent because we live so close to campus that occasionally I walk over.
You could hear the cries.
Yeah, I walk over. But that was my point. I was going to say I heard no tears from Our Ladies University last night. I don't think anybody cares what's said as long as actions on Saturday night back it up. Now, obviously, there was a little bit of embarrassment in the moment there for some Notre Dame folks, but it's over and done with, and back it up, and people, he'll become a legend alongside, Rudy and Montana and Theismann and all those guys if he happens to make a difference-making play Saturday night.
When you're talking about a guy who Notre Dame needs to become a legend on Saturday night, it might be Tyler Buckner at quarterback, kid making his first start. There's been a lot of rumbling in the Notre Dame media in the last few weeks between sites, between publishers and fans, where people saying that he was inaccurate. There were some questions about him as a passer, and it's just fun to watch because normally all that sort of media insanity is reserved for Ohio State. So I was glad to see that you guys were suffering some of that. But what have you seen out of Tyler Buckner that actually gives Notre Dame optimism that he's the guy that can walk into Ohio Stadium and do what Matt Barkley did for USC in 2008 as a freshman? And obviously Tyler's not a true freshman, but what do you see that gives you that confidence?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say let's not get lost in a silo burn, be it from the Notre Dame fan base or the Ohio State fan base or the aforementioned Volunteers fan base that Austin and I know so well. There's that Message Board Geniuses account out there on Twitter for a reason. It's not a feed of 3 programs. It's a feed of a lot of Message Board Geniuses across the country. But your point is well taken. I would number one contend we didn't see a tremendous amount of practice. I had some additional chances to view things and to be around the program. I didn't see enough to pretend that I'm smart enough to say Tyler Buckner was grossly inaccurate or Drew Pine was incredibly accurate. I think both those guys are gamers who play better when the pace is live, when everything is happening in a hurry around them because of their styles of play. Now, I can tell you one of the full practices we've watched that both Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner had incredible touchdown throws where they were flush from the pocket, scrambling out, and made a really, really impressive throw on the run in a relatively tight window. For Tyler Buckner, particularly because he's got a little bit better size than Drew Pine, although neither of those guys is overly large. He's a guy that really needs in the flow of the game that probably sets up a bit of his throw game off of his ability to run and engineer some things on the ground with the offense. But Tyler Buckner has really nice arm talent. He redid his mechanics maybe between his junior and senior year that never happened out in California. And so there's been an ongoing evolution, I think, in that regard from some of his work with quarterback coach and then what he's obviously gotten from a guy that I think is a brilliant QB coach and offensive coordinator in Tommy Rees. But I don't buy into the fact that Tyler Buckner's been wildly inaccurate. I have not personally seen that. You have sometimes throws where guys overthrow a guy for sure, and we've seen that occasionally. And you have times where this wide receiver core at Notre Dame is so depleted, we don't know necessarily that the receiver ran to the X. We don't know that he ran, that he had his break proper. We don't know a number of those things. But Tyler Buckner has been throwing with Lorenzo Styles. I know the Styles family is a significant storyline this weekend. He's been throwing with Lorenzo Styles since they both camped at Notre Dame when they were 15 years old. So, 5-6 years ago. But I don't buy into that notion. Now, it's a tall task, and he's got to answer the bell in one of what I think is probably a top 5 venue in all of college football Saturday night. So that's an entirely different thing. But he answered the bell in a relatively impressive environment on the road last year at Virginia Tech when he was forced to play and ended up playing nearly 3 quarters.
John, you mentioned, the Styles family. We know there's Al Washington, James Laurinaitis, and then the guy at the top, Marcus Freeman. There's a few other connections that go the other way with Tony Alford and others for Ohio State. There's a lot of crossover between these two programs. They like to measure themselves against each other, even if they're not primary rivals, and they almost never play. I believe this is the 5th all-time regular season meeting. These series don't come along very often, but from your experience, we've talked this week about Marcus Freeman's comments about diminishing his own value of his degree from Ohio State and not making the same mistake twice. He's said a lot of things to me that don't sound like the Marcus Freeman that I have long known. I don't know, what has been your experience with what he's tried to do to put his imprint on Notre Dame? How is he doing with that? What is said more, I don't know, privately when you've been around him and some of those coaches?
Yeah, and I was in Marcus's office in late June visiting with him, and I think he feels stung that some of those comments were definitively taken out of context. And if you saw the full quote, it really had more to do with the fact that Notre Dame literally had never offered online classes until the pandemic hit. And I think that was his point. You've never heard a Notre Dame kid go out and say, I don't know where this building is on campus because I don't go to class on campus. And I think that was Marcus Freeman's point. And we've heard that, not just out of an Ohio State player. I think we've heard that from a couple of SEC players through the years. But the biggest thing I've done or that I've seen that Marcus has done is really fully and wholly embrace Notre Dame, every element about it. He's big on the Notre Dame brand. And it is a globally iconic brand in a lot of ways. There are a few brands that stand on their name alone, the way that I would say Alabama, Notre Dame, Ohio State, maybe a USC, certainly Texas. To me, those are the premium brands in college athletics and especially college football. So I think he's just leaned into tradition. He's leaned into the fact that they probably, well, there's no probably to it. They're definitely very conservative in their NIL approach in an era that it's harder than ever before to recruit if you're not non-conservative in your NIL approach. So,
you mean aggressive?
Yeah, I do mean that. Absolutely aggressive. If you're not giving a potential $8 million contract to a 5-star quarterback, or if you're not lining up deals before guys ever move deep in the heart of Texas, then what are you doing? But somehow Notre Dame is really not doing that. They really are not. And they're a consensus top 3 recruiting class. And I think that's, again, it's the direct reflection of Marcus Freeman. Austin, you reference it. And one of the ways I best got to know Marcus Freeman early on as a defensive coordinator at Notre Dame was because I said, hey, Marcus, you and I have a mutual friend. It's Austin Ward. And he immediately wanted to know how I knew you and talked to me about our relationship, you and I, and then talked to me about our relationship, Marcus and I, here in South Bend. And that authenticity resonates. And so I think when you ask about Marcus making a comment that he would tell you in a heartbeat he was really misconstrued, and then the one about not making the same mistake twice was just a flip comment that I guarantee you he would like to have back. He loves Ohio State. He really does. He has a great pride about having played there. And the man has an incredible relationship with Jim Tressel. And so, if you're a first-time head coach at one of those globally iconic programs, you're not going to make every step perfect. But Marcus Freeman's overcome a lot of that because he is absolutely one of the most authentic individuals I've met anywhere. And he is pretty close to being in a class on his own in the industry that we all cover.
Yeah, incredible force of personality, generous guy. Looking forward to his return again to the Horseshoe. John, how would you most like to prepare? What's the routine now? You have a Friday night in Columbus, Ohio. It's been a few years since you've returned. What do you have lined up on the itinerary? What needs to be on the itinerary?
4 years, I guess it has been since I helped you guys cover a Ohio State Syracuse game, and we took in a little Dave Matthews Band, and in the words of the great one, y'all got it right. So we'll probably have some tunes, I would think, Friday night. Hopefully, we can find some victims for the cornhole boards, and our wives will probably ultimately tell us what we're going to do Friday night. Austin, let's be honest.
That's true.
I have one more question, John. Quick hitter. From the Notre Dame perspective, I guess it's 2 questions, and then I can talk about somewhere in particular, the brewery you'll almost certainly be at on Friday. From a Notre Dame
what do you know about that, Berm?
I've heard about it. What's the player from the Notre Dame perspective that they're most concerned about beating them for Ohio State? But also on the flip side, who is the one Notre Dame player that Ohio State fans don't really know about that they should be prepared to learn the name of on Saturday?
Good questions. I would say more so than an individual player, although Travion certainly would probably be at the tip top of that list. I think it's about the run game. And Marcus Freeman said it point blank. Some players said it point blank earlier in the week as well. If Notre Dame cannot stymie or at least slow down and moderate the Ohio State run game, then it's going to be a really long night. So I think more than any specific individual, the concern is how does Notre Dame assert itself on the defensive line to help mitigate that Ohio State run game? Because that's when Ohio State is truly balanced, then that's an offense with so many NFL guys that you just see so much trouble ever, not just stopping it, but even slowing it down. So that's number one. On the flip side of that, it might be a Lorenzo Styles that had some key moments a year ago, but was never the featured guy. But it's going to be potentially bruising running back Audric Estime, who's been really, really impressive this camp. And he's like a sleeker, in shape, faster Jerome Bettis, I would say, a modern day bowling ball like that. So those are a couple of guys. And in the throw game, it might be the true freshman Tobias Merriweather. He has probably been the singular standout at the wide receiver position in camp. And he has the ability to really go up and get some balls one-on-one. So that's a guy that I would look for.
Fantastic insight on the other side of this from John Brice, a Football Scoop, one of our best friends. It was great to share the screen and some time with two of the foremost legal minds also in all of college football media, Jeremy Birmingham and John Brice. Thank you both for hanging out here. Going to be great to have us all together on a Saturday night in the Horseshoe. For those two JBs, what do you got, Berm? You're rolling your eyes over there.
I'm really looking forward to hearing your guys' report from your time at SIP on Friday. And I think you should make sure that you let people know what time you're going to be there so you can welcome the general public to challenge John in cornhole.
I will have a later arrival for the evening, so I'm not.
I don't challenge John to cornhole. No. He's my most successful all-time teammate.
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying, but people are going to challenge him, not you, because clearly he's carrying the team.
Well, you may.
I'm just. I don't know about that, but.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I will sign off by saying it's been an honor and a privilege to be part of the audible Free Berm movement here today.
So much. You look at him, hands crossed, just distraught. Okay, let's wrap it up before he gets more angry. That's Berm and JB. I am Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us on the Podcast Daily. One more to go on Friday, and then it's game day. We'll see you there.